Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022, and this evening we are going to be getting results from New York's 19th Congressional District. Now, this is a special election that is set to occur due to the vacancy left by Representative Antonio Delgado. He is a Democrat who was tapped by Governor Kathy Hochul following Governor Andrew Cuomo's resignation to become the next Lieutenant Governor of the state of New York. Now, he took his position back in either May or June, which prompted a special election that coincided with the August 23rd primaries. Now, these primaries are quite important because they are actually taking place in an additional congressional district for those running here. The reason being that New York has lost a singular district. In addition to that, you are taking a look at a state with a bunch of new shapes and sizes of these congressional districts, so people are being moved around. But in coinciding with it, you do have this special election that has been now a high-profile race following the two special elections in Nebraska and Minnesota. This special election will be a test of both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party's influence on the American public, and specifically within this district. Now, the reason why it's so important is because in the presidential election, New York's 19th district has been a swing district. In 92, it voted for H.W. Bush. In 96, it voted for Clinton. 2000, 2004, it voted for Bush. In 2008 and 2012, it voted for Obama. Then in 2016, it went for Trump, and in 2020, it went for Biden. In many cases, it has gone correctly with the victor, dating all the way back to 1996. The interesting thing about it is that it has gotten more competitive. Despite Joe Biden doing as well as Obama did in the state of New York, he only won this district by about 2 percentage points last election. Now, to put you into a reminiscent point of view on the election back then, the generic ballot was much more favorable to Democrats on the national polling level. Democrats were up about 7 points nationwide, 7 points higher than where they were at least today, giving Democrats about 50% of the vote. That translated to roughly a 2-point margin to victory on the presidential level. However, the House level was much more significant in favor of the Democrats, with Antonio Delgado winning by about 11%. What I will say is that I want us to take a look at each case district by district, and in New York's 19th, the Republican here, practically gave up the campaign a month after, and following the election loss, unfortunately took his own life. Now, this is something that I think did play into the election results, especially taking a look at the district in 2016, 2014, 2012, and even 2018. I think that there was a complete and total collapse of the Republican Party's campaign in this district leading into the 2020 election. So if the Democrats are to win this district by any margin, I will say that we need to talk about what that actually results in, because the benchmark here is not 11.3%, but honestly speaking, a Republican victory. And we'll talk about that as we take a look at previous years. I talked about 2012 because that is an election in which Barack Obama won this congressional district by a pretty solid amount, won by 52 to 46. You fast forward to 2014, it becomes a Republican plus 29 district. 2016 comes around, and the Democrats only lose it by about 8 points, but then 2018 comes around, Antonio Delgado wins it by about 5. The reason why I'm skeptical about using 2020 as a benchmark is because the Democrats won it here in 2018 by 5. For them to outperform in 2020 means that voters here either A, liked Antonio Delgado, or B, did not like the Republican, or both, which is what contributed to this double-digit victory. I think when you take a look at open races, you almost always should resort down to the presidential level. Incumbents can take grips onto voters. That would mean, sometimes states and districts will move in different directions, even if the national average isn't moving in the direction that you might expect. For instance, the state of Ohio in 2016 went to Rob Portman by 21%. Should J.D. Vance win Ohio by 11% in 2022? What's the argument there if Democrats are to say, the state itself shifted by 10 points relative to the last election? Republicans would argue, hey, there was an incumbent there. That's not fair to make that comparison. And I would argue the same exact thing here. An open race, specifically a special election, typically requires it to be a reversion back to the presidential level. And that's exactly how I'm going to treat it as such. So Joe Biden won this district by 2 points in the last election. Donald Trump won it in 2016 by 7 points then. So I will be using that as my benchmark as we continue through this video. Looking at the special election as of right now, the expectations actually are that Republicans do win it. It is a toss-up by the Cook Political Report and Inside Elections, but Larry Sabato's crystal ball has had it as a lean Republican distinction. The polling data, and I say this with every single poll that has been taken so far in this district, shows the Republican Mark Molinaro ahead by sometimes margins of 3 points, others 8 points, and others 10 points. The largest I've seen thus far is 14 points district-wide, but the main takeaway here is the average that the Republican is above 50% and is leading the Democrat by a margin of about 8 to 9 points overall. That's significant. I think that definitely tells us something, that the expectation for this race is that the Republican does win. Again, even though a Democrat won here by double digits in the last election, recognize each case on a specific case-by-case basis. In the presidential level, you really start to see the competitive roots of this district, how it went to Trump in 2016, and the same argument could be made. Maybe this year is better than 2016 should Democrats lose this district by a lesser margin than when Trump won it by back in 2016. You can really make any type of distinction here, so it just depends on what you want to value, but I think the most recent election, the most recent presidential election, should be our benchmark for this race. But also one thing that I haven't introduced yet, but I am going to now, the PVI of the district. Taking a look at the PVI rated by FiveThirtyEight, it has a partisan lean of Republican +4. What that essentially means is that it's about 4 points to the right of the nation. Looking at the 2020 election results, I'd honestly buy that. Joe Biden only won this district by about 2 points, practically speaking less than 2%. And for us to look at the national level, you find that the margin of victory for Biden was 4.5% or 5% if you want to round up. That 4.5% margin of victory is comparable to what you saw here in this district, but still an outperformance. The Democrats did better nationally on the presidential level than how they did in this 19th district. And considering that Biden is now down 14 points, the generic ballot is now 7 points less than where it was in 2020 based off of polling data, one could reasonably expect and argue that Republicans are going to win here. I'm not entirely sold that the GOP is going to win here, but I will say that the general expectation is that they do. I don't have a prediction at this point. I'm not going to say definitively I expect the GOP or the Democrats to win it. In many cases, I do like to narrow my scope down and try to force myself to make a prediction. If I was to put money on it, I'd say Republicans win this district. But the question is, how much do they win it by, and what that means for national implications? I will say that Republicans should absolutely be winning this just based off the PVI alone. Removing an incumbent is one of the very few things that you can do to dramatically change the trajectory of a race. Scandals, removing an incumbent, and over-excessive fundraising are things that you could expect to see drastically change the expected outcome of a race. Looking at the fact that this election is being held today, the Democrats are behind in overall fundraising. The Democrats don't have an incumbent in this race. They're behind on the generic ballot relative to where it was back in 2020 when Biden only won here by 2. Their president of the United States is down. And considering what we have seen thus far, yes, Democrats have made improvements in Minnesota and also Nebraska. But I will also say that some special elections prior to the Dobbs decision have benefited the GOP. That's why this is such a test. This will be the third special election to be held since the Dobbs decision. We've seen Kansas in addition, which was technically a regularly scheduled referendum election in which abortion rights were elevated and maintained into protection by the Kansas Constitution by double digits in that referendum. But in these special elections, Minnesota and Nebraska have narrowed up, but prior to the Dobbs decision, they actually have gone much further in favor of the GOP. And that's also something that I think would be very important to note. So when we think about all of this added into one, I will say that this race might become more competitive, but I do think the GOP does have the upper hand at this point. Should they flip it, Democrats are going to be worried about whipping votes through November. So far, the Republicans have picked up 1 seat, which means the Democrats are at about 221 to 215. It's a very narrow House majority, and if Republicans are to win another district here, you would see 220 to 215. Sorry, it was 221 to 214. Now it's going to be somewhere around 220 to 215 should this special election flip to the GOP. Now, neither of these two candidates are going to be facing off against each other this November. It will be different candidates, as we will see decided by tonight's election. It might not even be the 19th Congressional District. I know Pat Ryan is jumping over to the 18th Congressional District. But the point is that these two are going to face off against each other, serve until January, and then likely or potentially win their regular elections in whatever primary they've decided to run in. This special election, though, I think is going to be a very big test as to whether or not Democrats are going to outperform, as they did in Minnesota and also Nebraska, or whether they underperform. I think anything short of what 538 baseline expects the GOP to do, which is really just a Republican plus 5 to 6 point victory, means that there is something going on. Now, that sounds like it's me trying to make an excuse for the Democratic Party, but think about it with realistic expectations. If the nation is 7 points redder on the generic ballot than where it was in 2020, if the approval rating and forecast there is significantly more lopsided in favor of the Republican Party than it was in 2020, when you remove an incumbent who sure might have added to the ticket, been able to do well, when you remove that incumbent, you're reverting back to baseline. And to be quite fair, the GOP has a strong candidate for this race. You should be expecting a Republican victory, the same way many lean and likely formerly Republican districts became lean and likely Democratic districts in 2018. That happened because Democrats were fighting for a race, and you could practically predict how they were going months before the election. That's a very similar story to see what we're happening right now. And let's say, for instance, Democrats are able to miraculously, and I say that because it will be a very big shocker if they do. If they are able to hold on to this district, it's very good news for the GOP, because it means that even in an environment where Biden is down 14, where the generic ballot is again 7 points to the right of where it was in 2020 based off of polling averages, and you also have just simply an open race and non-incumbent, that's good. It means Democrats are on track, and it means it matches up the results that we have seen not only in Kansas, but also in Minnesota, but also in Nebraska. This is a Trump double-digit state or district, and the Republican won here by 5. Minnesota, first district, that went to Donald Trump also by double digits. And guess what? The Democrat won here by 4. The Republican won here by 4. These special elections are eerily reminiscent of what we saw in 2017 and 2018. Jon Ossoff's Georgia's 6th district, James Thompson's Kansas's 4th district. Traditionally conservative and Republican districts narrowing up usually indicate Democrats are on track to do better in the November election. And in quite literally every single important special election since the Dobbs decision, regularly scheduled election, voter turnout number, etc., all seem to be benefiting the Democratic Party. Because voters, quite frankly, care about the issue of abortion. But the question is, how much do they actually care, and will that impact New York's 19th? Pat Ryan, Mark Molinaro, I think those are candidates that are good fits for each other, but I think the Republicans do have a very strong candidate. We could be stuck in a position where the Republican here was a lot less electable than Molinaro. I think you could have seen someone who was an extreme, make America great again candidate captivate the base, win that nomination, and potentially do worse than Molinaro likely will this evening. He very well could win. I think that the Republicans here are, still in the upper hand, just considering the current composition of the district, the current expectations. All of these things seem to tell me that, hey, there is something here benefiting the GOP, and you should expect them to do well. Well, we also can be counteracted by potentially past elections. I think really what we should be analyzing and taking a look at is the data released when the election's over. Did Democrats surge in urban areas, suburban areas? Did Republicans surge in rural areas? Did Trump matter? Did Biden matter? Did anything matter in this district? Did it revert exactly how you expected it to if we were back on the presidential level, a Trump plus 7 district instead of a Biden plus 2 district because of the national approval rating? Or does the Dobbs decision oversee most of what people are thinking about, or the plurality of them, and impact the way they vote in the general election? These are questions that can be asked following the election. But I think that this should give you a general rundown and understanding of where we are within this race, what our expectations are, and what we will be comparing it to at the end of the evening, or at least tomorrow. The predicted betting markets currently have the GOP at 70 cents for a yes share, Democrats at 29 cents. Over the 90-day trend, Democrats were in a much better position in the middle of June, about 44 cents for a Democratic share. But as we've gotten closer to the election, Republicans have actually increased it to 66 cents for them. Democrats just at 34 cents. That's talking about a third deficit there. And as of election day, based off the reports that we are seeing thus far, Republicans have a 70% chance, at least, if you extrapolate this to percentages, a 70% chance at winning the House special election in New York's 19th. Let's see if it's changing after we refresh the page. It does, slightly, for the Democratic Party. But this is what I want you to take away from it, that this district is going to be somewhat of a bellwether. It's going to be an indicator, and the expectations have been very clearly laid out. If Democrats are to win this evening, Republicans will spin it like they are holding on to a seat that they currently have. But you can't deny It went to Republicans in every election in the 2010s, except for 18 and then in 2020. And a lot of it was their own doing. New York's 19th is a district that, as of right now, if I was to put money on it, I would say the GOP wins, but I don't say it with full and total confidence. As we have been proven wrong in Kansas, Minnesota, Nebraska, special elections can be more competitive than they were expected to be, can be more pro-Democrat than we expected them to be. It's just nothing that really makes sense in a red wave year, or maybe it just simply isn't as red of a wave year as we might think. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.